Readers Entertainment Radio presents Booklights with your host, author Lisa Kessler. Booklights, where we're shining a light on good books.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning into Booklights. I'm so excited that you're here today because we have a genre that we don't have on nearly enough, cyberpunk today. So if you've never read Mark Everglade, you are in for a treat. I'll read his bio here so you can get to know him. Mark Everglade is a cyberpunk author whose first novel hit number 5 in its genre. His most recent book, Inertia, won the 2024 Fire and Ember Award for the best sci-fi novel from a small publisher. His short stories have been featured beside authors such as Cory Doctorow, Kat Rambo, Walter John Williams, and Jim Keane. After spending his life studying sociology, he has been interviewed by both NBC News and a BBC correspondent, and you can learn more about Mark at his website. If you look down in the show notes, I have a link to his website right there, markeverglade.com. So be sure to check in over there and sign up for his newsletter. And without any further delay, Mark, are you there?
Hi, Lisa. Thanks for having me today.
Hi, thanks so much for being here. So your book, Inertia, is cyberpunk, right? Do you want to tell everybody kind of, if they're not familiar, it's part of sci-fi, but you want to tell them what makes something cyberpunk?
Absolutely. And that's a great question. And it's a word that Bruce Bethke first came up with in the early 80s to describe a new genre of writing that was emerging from people like Kevin Jeter and J.G. Ballard and others that were inspiring this genre, Thomas Pynchon. Basically, a genre that would explore a dystopian society, but more so that it would explore our connection and relationship to technology, how technology impacts society and our social relations, such as social media. And in addition, how technology and kind of intersects with corporate profit and affects the relationship between the rich and the poor. Who has access to technology and who does not, for instance? Which countries have access to the latest manufacturing techniques, which ones do not? And you basically wrap that all in a shell that's kind of like the Matrix, more or less.
Nice, nice. Well, and when you were telling us about that, it got me thinking about your sociology background. How much did that attract you to the idea of writing futuristic cyberpunk?
You know, I got the cyber part as a child because I love technology, even though at the time computers were running on DOS and we had ICQ and AOL, it was all very preliminary, but it excited me. And I learned words like CPU and RAM as a child and what those things meant. And now they're just common vernacular. But over time, when I studied sociology, that's when I understood the punk element, that there was this kind of opposition to the status quo culture. And cyberpunk is premised on a strong sense of individuality, Lisa, and personal expression and individual rights for expression, free speech. And we can't have that if we are suppressing the voices of minorities, such as, women and people of color who have been so often had their voices suppressed and their accomplishments and achievements diminished in the face of the majority. And so that's what the sociology brought to me is this kind of punk element that I tried to incorporate.
I love that. So, do you want to tell everybody a little bit about your book, Inertia, and why they should go grab it? What's the story on it?
Sure. So Inertia, it's a story about a young woman, Ash, who lives on a flooded planet, and the planet used to be tidal locked. In other words, this planet used to have one side that was always daytime, and the other side was always nighttime. And because the patterns of daylight impacted the economy, there were different politicians who were trying to change the planet's rotation to control how much daylight one side of the planet had versus another. But then this basically created a lot of ecological disasters. When a planet's rotation is changed, it's not only the daylight cycles that are changed, but also things like hurricane patterns, Coriolis effects, and wind patterns, storm patterns, how much rainfall falls in one area. So in Inertia, Ash is basically even the first scene just enveloped her town. She lives in the slums or derelicts, and it's just completely flooding. More and more each day. The water level is building as it does throughout the book. And so she is a geological researcher, and is basically discovers too much one day when she runs into some files that explore how different corporations have profited off the environmental destruction that's causing the poor so much trouble. And so she has to basically, her life's put at risk because she knows too much, and she has to rely on her father, Severin, in order to, basically for help. But she knows that he is her father, but he doesn't know that she exists. He doesn't know he has this child. And so there's this relationship basically with an estranged father figure, and that's kind of the core familial dynamic of the book.
Well, what inspired the idea that you would make this planet where politicians want to change the rotation? Did you watch a documentary? What was the inspiration behind the
Uh,
story?
yes, so there was an actual planet like this found, Glyce 581G, which I used. And this planet's, it's more than 20 million light years away or something. But it is an actual place that's almost exactly like Earth. Like it's the same temperature, it's the same composition. You could probably breathe there. The atmosphere is very similar. The only problem is that it is constantly nighttime on half of the world, and it's so far away. And so that inspired me. And so I started reading the research, the NASA research on it. And it took like, 40, 50 hours to study it. As a sociologist, I was way outside my field, of course.
Right.
So, they always say, write what you know, Lisa. And so that's why I tried to kind of guide the book towards the social dynamics rather than the science to that degree, more of a social science fiction. But, incorporating some of that science in there so that it still feels like it's modern and new.
Right, right. That's so cool. Well, when you were writing this, were you picturing it as a series or is it just a standalone book?
Inertia is the second one in the series. Hemispheres was the first, and the
Oh,
new
okay.
one, and then the new one, Kill Switch, comes out next month. And so basically, and when it comes to a series, I like each one to be standalone, and I think Inertia is actually the best place to start with, as far as having the reader feel grounded. When you write your first book, you throw in every idea you've ever had in your whole life because
Yes.
you're not sure you'll ever get another chance to do
Right,
something.
right. They call it your kitchen sink book.
Yes, that's what it is. And so that's why I think Inertia is kind of the strongest starting point of the series.
Well, when you wrote Hemispheres, since that was the first book, were you thinking about it being a series, or as you wrote it, were there characters where you're like, "Oh, I'm gonna have to check in with this character next book"?
Wasn't necessarily planning a series out. You should do that in advance as much as possible. The more you do so, it makes it 10 times easier. But yeah, at the time, I was, some of the characters I wanted to follow and some I didn't. And so I put about 35 years between the first book and the second. And that period allowed for people who were, young revolutionaries in the first book. Well, now they're older parents that are retired. And it allows for their children to kind of continue the story on. I like stories where you get to see like the Dune series. You get to see the same family generation play out over the course of decades or centuries sometimes.
Right, right. And I feel like that's a really a core thing for sci-fi a lot of times is you do see the generations, not only does the technology grow, but the families and the dynamics do too.
Sure, absolutely.
When you were writing this, I don't know if you're a plotter or a pantser, but did you have any big surprises? What was your biggest surprise in Inertia?
Trying to get the character tones right. I will rewrite the same thing over and over. I'm surprised when I read it and it doesn't feel like the character's jumping off the page yet. You should, I think Emerson said that a good book, you should be able to cut the words and they'll bleed, because they feel so alive. And so I rewrote it over and over until I could get that right. And especially about trying to get the first time she sees her father in the flesh. That was a really difficult scene for me. I'm a stepfather, and I was thinking of like my daughter and some of the awkwardness that there can be in the relationship at times, and how you really have to work perhaps a little, it's equally rewarding, but you do have to work a little bit harder as a step parent sometimes to cultivate that relationship. And I was kind of thinking of some of that awkwardness when I wrote that. That was a scene I had to write over and over.
Nice. Um, do you have a favorite scene from the book? I mean, without spoilers that you could share?
Hmm. Favorite scene from Inertia. I really like the part where Severum, Ash's father, encounters his ex-wife, basically, and confronts her about why she didn't advise him that he had a child. And basically, from her perspective, he was a dangerous man that really would have been a negative influence on the daughter, you know. But from his perspective, he wanted an opportunity to redeem himself to the family and to, have a child and to be there. And I thought that section was pretty emotional, and pretty realistic in terms of uh, estrangement and how it occurs and how families divide, but also going forth, how the adversity they face, it brings them back together and reunites them as a family. Even if it's not perfect, they're not going to ever get married again, but they have a family dinner together, mom, dad, and daughter for the first time. You know.
Oh, that's nice. In the final book that comes out, did you say next month?
Yes.
Is it up for
Yes.
pre-order? Should people run out and get it?
I think it's up on Amazon, but I don't think the pre-orders have been put in yet. It'll probably
Oh,
be
okay.
pre-order in about 2 weeks. Yep.
But it's called Kill Switch, right?
Yes, Kill Switch Overkill.
Oh, nice. Is this the final book? Is it going to be a trilogy or will it continue?
No, that's the it's the final book, and it follows an antagonist from the second book, and basically her point of view. And I wrote it in first person because I really couldn't get the voice to come out right. And till I finally switched to first person, and then it made sense. It just really came together. I can read a brief excerpt too, if you like.
Well,
Oh,
in
go ahead.
this book, is it the antagonist that's in first person? Is it their story?
Yes, yes. So it's from the antagonist
Oh,
perspective, which allows it to be about redemption. And so after being, she's basically, Sabrina is misled by those in power. She's a genius college student, and as a college student, she comes up with all these inventions, and the college takes all of her research, and basically profits off of it, and she doesn't get any kind of recognition for her research or anything else. And so when politicians from this old guard, who are very much like oligarchs, when they recognize her talents, she knows that they're like evil oligarchs, that they are dictators, but she's so eager to be recognized for what she's done, and her genius, that she basically gives in to their whims and becomes very much an antagonist until one day, as society continues to fall apart under this dictatorship, she basically needs distances herself and finds she needs to redeem herself in some way. And that means having to ally with people that she used to be against and resolving old conflicts and admitting her own faults. Because until that point, Lisa, life was just a game to Sabrina. She just wanted to basically win, the success, the
right.
status, the power, the fortune, the governor who's her boyfriend, and then at some point you realize that that life is not worthwhile, it's not worth living, and it leads to a lot of destruction in the wake.
Okay, that sounds fantastic. When you're writing this series, were you also considering, how that would play out with what we're seeing in the world today?
Oh, yes. I mean, I started writing it at the beginning of COVID, and that was at the beginning of times where life felt very dystopian and very uncertain. There was, not only the pandemic, there was the political unrest. The original cyberpunk literature was following the Vietnam War, and it was in the midst of the Cold War. So it was written in a time of fear. And so for me, I started writing the cyberpunk in around 2019, because that was pandemic, there was a time of fear there, and people drift towards dystopian fiction during those time periods. They come to it and they want a sense of hope that, okay, here's the negative future, but here's ordinary people, Lisa, that are able to persevere and to overcome, what seems like an hopeless situation.
Right. I love that. When I was poking around on your website, I saw mention of an AI horror book. And as authors, AI has suddenly come into the picture, and we're like, hey, why is the computer trying to make art? Um, did you see that coming? I don't know. What was the title of the AI horror book?
AI horror. I'm not sure exactly which one. There were a couple of them, like Glitch Goddess, I think, that were short stories. And
Oh, okay.
AI features as a horrific element, throughout this series, because it does control the monetary system, the economy. It's a technocracy, a society controlled by a computer. It controls transportation. In relations between different countries are mediated by artificial intelligence. And it does become pretty horrific, the outcomes. And um, yeah, as far as envisioning AI doing things like writing books, the market is so flooded with books. There's 400,000 new books on Amazon every single
Right.
year in the English language.
Right.
And you add into that an AI that can write 1,000 books in an hour,
Right.
and one of them will probably be decent just by chance.
Right.
And so that's why on my website I try to like review, like filter through all the kind of trash out there and kind of highlight, here's a couple hundred reviews of books worth reading. I envisioned it would take over things like computer coding. I did not think it would touch on the creative arts to the degree it has.
Right, right. Yeah. And it's funny too that it's also invading social media because people are making these reels, and it's a little frightening to see the AI is getting better and better to where I see something and I'm like, and I look in the comments and there are people who think it's real. And I'm like, oh, this is frightening. Pretty soon, as it gets smarter, we won't be able to tell if it's real or not,
There's no way we'll be able to tell. The deep fakes are very, they're extremely most people don't check the sources on anything, whether it's Fox News or whether it's whatever. And so if you add to that the ability to create false images and false video feeds that are nearly, you'd have to be like I don't even know how you would recognize the difference. Anything that's coming from a reputable source is going to be believed immediately.
Right, right. Yeah, it is scary. But when you're writing cyberpunk about these things, do you feel like it is helping people to recognize, what the future could look like if we don't, make changes?
Absolutely. I mean, and it helps us have conversations like this, Lisa, and bring it up as, a topic that's worthy of discussion. What role do we want technology to play in our lives? We want
Right,
to feel connected to other people with things like social media. We don't want to have shallow relationships though, where we're
right.
just looking to see how many likes can I get out of someone? What can I get
Exactly.
out of it? And so, yeah, it's what do we want society to look like? And it's increasingly becoming we're more connected than ever across the world with one another, able to have conversations like this, but we're also more isolated. There aren't as many third places in the community anymore. The baseball fields and the bowling alleys are more empty than they used to be. Things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, do you see yourself always writing cyberpunk? Is there different genres that you're thinking about where you're like, I have this secret historical I want to write or something?
Oh yeah, historicals are great. But yeah, every time I try to do so, it just drifts in this direction. Even when I try to do fantasy, I'll write 5 to 10 chapters and just get rid of it and just throw it out. It doesn't feel like what's natural. You have
Right.
natural inclinations. And I always say, well, how could I sneak virtual reality into this? And at some point, now there are people who will combine fantasy and sci-fi. There's a book, Bone Dance, by Emma Bull in the late 90s, for instance. So there is a kind of cross-genre combination that's possible. But a lot of people don't necessarily like that. A lot of people who like sci-fi, they want their spaceships to be over here and their dragons over there.
That's right. That's right. The hard sci-fi versus
Yep.
that I always think of it as the Star Wars versus the Star Treks. Star Wars has a lot more fantasy and magic, and Star Trek, it's all about the machines.
Oh, absolutely. Well said. Well said.
Well, what's next for you? I'm assuming Kill Switch is already ready to go because it comes out next month, but what are you working on next?
I'm going to take a hiatus to kind of rebuild my family, following a couple kind of family tragedies and all. So just take a few years to really look at what my future is going to look like overall as far as like family structure and basic life. At that point, the arts will kind of seep back into it, but just trying to focus on like my son and things like that, and taking a break from writing. It can absorb all of your time if you let it. I mean, my
It
first
can.
book, yeah, the first book took 4,000 hours. I mean, subsequent ones may take a few hundred, but with all the marketing and everything else, it is a tremendous kind of, you have to keep that work-life balance in view.
Right, right. It is difficult. Um,
Yeah.
and when you are not writing, who inspires you? Who do you like to read that you go, oh my gosh, I got to get back to the keyboard? We always like to add to our to be read list.
Yes, I love some of the postmodern fiction, Kobo Abe and Haruki Murakami. Murakami is great. I don't like his depiction of women, but otherwise, I think he's misogynist. But otherwise, I think he's a genius writer. On the other hand, I also like fantasy like R.A. Salvatore, Dungeon and Dragon stuff, which
Hmm.
is you don't have to think too hard about it. It's kind of cheesy, but his characterization is just I can remember 100 different character names across his 30 book series. It's just
Wow, wow. They jump off the page and right into
yeah,
your heart.
they really do. And then there's more intellectual, philosophical works that are great. And I love the old 70s and 80s cyberpunk and sci-fi as well. I think that, the classics from Animal Farm to 1984 to Brave New World to Fahrenheit, all of those things that made this genre what it was that were there before. I mean, those are the ones that are really closest to my heart.
Right, right. I think about Fahrenheit 451. I love Ray Bradbury, and I got to meet him a couple times while he was alive,
Oh
which
my
was such
God.
a gift. But I
Mm.
feel like when you read books like that, and then you see what's happening now, and you're like, we we never learn. How do
Yes.
you feel as a writer of future who you see us doing the same things over and over again?
I mean, it is. You hope that if you look back at the past 50 years and 70 years, no, it seems like we never learn. And when you look at society over the past 5,000 years, we have made some progress. When you look at 5,000 years ago,
Well, that's true.
yeah,
We're just slow
and
learners.
yeah, dentistry, for instance, is a lot better. So there is progress in when you look at the big picture, but on the day to day, it seems like we're losing ground every day. You
Right,
know, Politics has become a circus. For instance.
right.
Um, and so, it, yeah, it is one of those things.
Yeah, Ray used to say, I write the future so we can avoid it, but but a lot of times we just keep marching. But I have heard people describe it change as a pendulum, and we push and then it swings back because we get scared, and then we push, and it's almost like humanity has this, they talk about the old lizard brain part of us that, tells us to be afraid, and we're very fear based, and so we push and it's going to be amazing, and then we get afraid and we move back, and we so I keep hoping that we're done with the moving back and we're going to push forward again.
That's what they say. Yeah, that essentially says it because I mean there is a just distinguishing what is progress from regress and looking at the future and what it can look like. We want freedom, but the problem is that there's a lot of responsibility that comes with freedom. And although we want freedom, we also want there to be boundaries, or it can feel like chaos.
Right.
Freedom can feel like chaos without boundaries. And so we do backtrack into, I want a greater sense of certainty. And I want it to be this or that. People will say, I want gender to be male or female. I want things to be simple. Um, when a part of us is longing for, more complex, holistic point of view.
Right. Well, and the word freedom means something different to everyone, because a lot of people say they want freedom, but I want it to be exactly like this. you know,
Yes. Oh, that's
I would
it.
like freedom, but it has to be this way.
You're completely right.
uh, Well, before we go, our readers always love to know because we have a lot of people who are starting to write. But what was your writing journey like? Because it sounds like you were you were into sociology and studying people. How did you end up writing a book?
I've been writing since the time I was like 13 or so, and I'd always enjoyed it. And as far as like writing a book, my first novel had a few chapters that I wrote when I was say like 16 years old, even,
Oh, wow.
that I kind of redid. So I was always kind of writing over the years. Um, but the journey to get started, I knew I wanted to be traditionally published because I needed kind of the social networking and social, to understand the industry itself.
Right.
As an indie author, you get much higher royalties. Of course, you keep your royalties, but it is difficult to be immersed into the business culture the way that a
Right.
traditional publisher will do. And so I applied to basically 30 of them, 29, and the 29th one accepted me. And at that point, yeah, we had just a wonderful working relationship over the years.
I love that. I love that. Looking back on it, did you find critique groups? How did you improve enough to get a publisher?
Yeah, so my friends and I created like cyberpunkday.com. And so Cyberpunk Day is a trademark day where every year people get together and content creators will do events with their audiences. And it just brings the community together to write stories together, to view live synthesizer electronic music performances,
Oh,
to
fun.
talk about video games and to do all sorts of stuff. So we have these online events that we did. And, it did create a writers group that came out of that with like 30 cyberpunk authors, Matt Goodwin and Anna Masakat and some wonderful authors. And we would throw our short stories to one another constantly on a Discord server. And we'd review each other's works and help promote it. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. If you try to do it alone, especially as an indie author, you cannot make it alone. So many of us are
No.
introverted, as writers, but you
Right.
can't do it alone, I swear.
Right. Yeah, you really do, especially in the market now where people are reading ebooks and they have to find you online. You do need to find your core people and lift everyone's boat.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Well, when people read your book and they're excited, what's the best way to get in touch with you? Do your website or do you have social media or how should they reach out?
I generally don't use social media, but I shut it down, especially after Musk took over Twitter. I said, I don't know at this point if I can
Yeah, I'm a
continue.
blue sky girl.
Yes. And so, but markeverglade.com on my about page, there's my email address and contact info. You can, my Goodreads links if you want to see what I'm reading at any given point.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, it has been so much fun chatting with you, and everybody run out and grab Inertia so that you'll be all ready for Kill Switch when it comes out next month, and also Hemispheres. It sounds like a fantastic book. Thanks so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you for having me, Lisa. It's been wonderful.
Thanks for joining us on Booklights. Be sure to connect with us at www.readersentertainment.com for articles, blogs, videos, and podcasts that matter to readers.